A millionaire sheik's son wouldn't stop screaming on a 14-hour flight, driving first-class passengers to their breaking point as Prince Khalid desperately tried everything to calm his 3-year-old Omar. The $20,000 seats couldn't buy peace when the boy's mother was having emergency surgery in New York, and 6 hours of non-stop crying had transformed luxury travel into pure torture. Furious passengers demanded action as the royal family's wealth proved useless against a toddler's terror. Then a woman from economy class did something that shocked everyone aboard. And what happened next would change thousands of refugee children's lives forever. Prince Khalid al-Rashid clutched his 3-year-old son Omar closer to his chest as the private jet climbed to cruising altitude over the Atlantic, the child's piercing screams echoing through the luxurious cabin despite every attempt to calm him during the 14-hour flight from Dubai to New York that had become a nightmare scenario for everyone aboard. "Please, Habib, you need to stop crying," Khalid whispered desperately in Arabic, his voice cracking with exhaustion after 6 hours of non-stop screaming that had begun the moment they boarded the aircraft at Dubai International Airport. "We'll be with Mama soon, I promise you, but Papa needs you to be brave for just a little longer." The oil fortune that had provided every luxury imaginable for his family couldn't solve the crisis that had developed when Omar's mother Layla had been rushed to Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan for emergency surgery that required immediate family presence. "Your Highness, perhaps if we tried the medication again?" suggested Dr. Ahmed Hassan, the family physician who had accompanied them on the urgent journey, his professional composure barely masking his own stress at being unable to help the distressed child who had rejected every attempt at comfort. "He won't take it," Khalid replied with frustration that reflected his helplessness in the face of his son's inconsolable distress. "And I don't want to force medication on him when he's already terrified about his mother being in the hospital." The prince's protective instincts warred with his desperation for relief from the crying that had created tension throughout the aircraft's luxury cabin. "Maybe if we called Layla again," suggested his personal assistant Fatima, though she knew that the time difference and hospital restrictions made communication difficult during the extended flight. "She's in surgery," Khalid reminded her with pain in his voice. "And even if we could reach her, Omar is too upset to talk coherently to anyone right now." The helplessness in his tone reflected how his vast wealth and royal connections were meaningless when confronted with a toddler's emotional crisis that no amount of money could immediately resolve. The other passengers in the first-class cabin had begun to show obvious signs of irritation as Omar's crying continued without pause, their expensive tickets providing no protection from the child's distress that had transformed their luxury travel experience into an endurance test. "This is absolutely ridiculous," muttered businessman Robert Sterling to his wife Margaret, his voice loud enough to carry across the aisle where Prince Khalid was struggling to comfort his son. "I paid $20,000 for this seat, and now I have to listen to some spoiled brat scream for hours because his parents can't control him properly." His complaint drew nods of agreement from other passengers who shared his frustration but lacked his willingness to voice their displeasure publicly. "Maybe they should have sedated the child before boarding," whispered socialite Victoria Hamilton to her traveling companion, "or at least arranged for proper childcare that could handle the situation without disrupting everyone else's flight." Her suggestion reflected the entitled assumption that wealthy families should have sufficient resources to prevent their children from causing inconvenience to other first-class passengers who expected perfect comfort during international travel. "The noise is giving me a migraine," complained investment banker Jonathan Mitchell as he adjusted his noise-canceling headphones that proved inadequate against Omar's piercing cries. "And I have an important merger meeting as soon as we land in New York that requires me to be alert and focused." His professional concerns about the impact of sleep deprivation on his business effectiveness reflected how Omar's distress was creating cascading problems that affected multiple people beyond his immediate family. "Someone should say something to that man," suggested pharmaceutical executive Patricia Chen, "because this level of disruption is unacceptable on a flight this expensive, regardless of who his family might be or how much money they have." Her comment reflected growing passenger consensus that Prince Khalid's royal status shouldn't exempt his family from normal expectations about managing children's behavior during long international flights. "I heard his wife is in the hospital," observed retired diplomat James Thompson with more sympathy than his fellow passengers had demonstrated. So maybe we should show some understanding for a father who's dealing with a crisis while trying to travel with a distressed child. His attempt at compassion fell on deaf ears among passengers whose comfort had been disrupted for hours without apparent relief or resolution. The flight attendant who approached Prince Khalid's seat carried herself with the professional composure that international carriers trained their staff to maintain even in the most challenging customer service situations that tested their patience and diplomatic skills. "Your Highness, I understand this is a difficult situation," said Senior Flight Attendant Jennifer Walsh, her voice combining respect for his royal title with gentle firmness about the disruption his son was causing. "But other passengers are becoming increasingly upset about the noise level, and I need to explore options that might help everyone involved." Her diplomatic approach acknowledged his status while addressing the legitimate concerns of other travelers who had paid premium prices for peaceful luxury travel. "I've tried everything," Khalid replied with exhaustion that made his royal bearing seem fragile and human. "He won't eat, he won't sleep, he won't take medicine. And he just keeps asking for his mama who is having surgery right now in New York." His explanation provided context for Omar's distress while revealing his own emotional vulnerability in dealing with family crisis that his wealth and position couldn't immediately resolve. "Perhaps we could move you to a private section of the aircraft?" Walsh suggested, though she knew the plane's configuration offered limited options for isolating the crying child from other passengers. "That might help reduce the impact on other travelers while still allowing us to assist you with your son's needs." Her problem-solving approach reflected airline protocols for managing disruptive situations without creating additional conflicts that could escalate beyond customer service issues. "Omar needs to be near people," Khalid explained. "Isolation makes his anxiety worse, and in his current state, being alone would probably increase his crying rather than reduce it." His understanding of his son's psychological needs demonstrated paternal insight that transcended cultural and economic boundaries. "What about asking if any passengers have experience with distressed children?" Walsh suggested hopefully. "Sometimes a fresh approach from someone with childcare background can provide breakthrough that family members can't achieve due to emotional involvement." Her proposal reflected creative problem-solving that airline staff developed through experience with diverse passenger crises that required unconventional solutions. The woman who had been observing the situation from 3 rows behind finally stood up and approached Prince Khalid's seat, her movement drawing curious attention from frustrated passengers who hoped someone might finally resolve the crisis that had disrupted their expensive flight experience. "Excuse me, sir, my name is Sarah Martinez, and I'm a pediatric nurse," she said with professional confidence that immediately commanded attention. "I've been listening to your son's crying pattern, and I think I might understand what's happening with him right now." Her medical credentials provided authority that transcended the social hierarchy that typically governed first-class interactions between strangers and royal families. "Please, anything you can suggest," Khalid replied with desperate hope, his royal pride completely subordinated to his need for help with his distressed son. "I'm willing to try anything that might calm him down and help him feel better." His vulnerability in accepting assistance from a stranger reflected how parental desperation could overcome cultural barriers and social conventions that normally prevented such interactions. "From what I can observe," Sarah continued as she studied Omar's behavior with clinical assessment skills, "he's not just crying from general distress. He's showing signs of severe separation anxiety combined with sensory overload from the unfamiliar environment and engine noise." Her professional diagnosis provided framework for understanding Omar's behavior as medical condition rather than simple misbehavior or poor parenting. "His mother is having surgery in New York," Khalid explained. "And he's never been separated from her for this long, especially not during a medical emergency that he can sense but doesn't understand." The additional context helped Sarah refine her assessment while building rapport with a father who clearly loved his son despite his inability to provide effective comfort. "May I try something?" Sarah asked respectfully. "I have a technique that sometimes works with children who are experiencing this type of anxiety-driven distress, but I would need your permission to interact with him directly. Her request for consent demonstrated professional boundaries while offering hope for resolution that had eluded the family's previous attempts. Of course, please try, Khalid agreed immediately. Nothing we've attempted has worked, and everyone on this plane needs relief from his crying. His acknowledgement of the broader impact reflected awareness that his family's crisis was affecting other people who deserved consideration despite their lack of sympathy for his situation. Sarah knelt beside Omar's seat and began speaking to him in a gentle voice that carried professional authority combined with maternal warmth that seemed to penetrate his distress in ways that previous attempts had failed to achieve. "Hi Omar, my name is Sarah, and I'm a nurse who helps little boys like you when they're scared and missing their mamas," she said in English first, then repeated in Arabic that surprised both Khalid and the listening passengers who hadn't expected linguistic competence from the unassuming woman. "I know you miss your mama, but I'm here to help you until we reach her." Sarah continued in fluent Arabic that immediately caught Omar's attention and caused his crying to diminish slightly. "You speak Arabic?" Khalid asked with amazement. "That's incredible. Where did you learn our language?" His surprise reflected how Sarah's unexpected cultural competence was already having calming effect on both father and son. "I worked in refugee camps in Jordan and Lebanon for several years," Sarah explained while maintaining focus on Omar. "And I learned that children respond better when they hear their native language during times of stress and fear." Her international experience provided credibility that transcended economic and social boundaries while demonstrating genuine understanding of Middle Eastern culture and family dynamics. "Omar, Habib, can you tell Sarah what's wrong?" Khalid asked his son, using the same endearing term but now with hope that a medical professional might succeed where family members had failed. "Mama hurt," Omar whispered between sobs, his first coherent words in hours providing insight into his emotional state that previous observers had missed. "I know your mama is hurt," Sarah responded with empathetic validation. "But the doctors in New York are very good at fixing mamas, and your papa is taking you to see her right now." Her therapeutic communication acknowledged Omar's fears while providing reassurance that was both honest and comforting. "Can you help me count to 10 in Arabic while we wait for the plane to take us to Mama?" Sarah suggested, introducing distraction technique that engaged Omar's cognitive abilities rather than just trying to suppress his emotional distress. The counting exercise that Sarah initiated with Omar created the first sustained period of calm that the aircraft had experienced since takeoff, as passengers throughout the first-class cabin fell silent to observe the interaction between the pediatric nurse and the distressed royal child. "Wahid, Ithnain, Thalitha," Omar whispered as he counted with Sarah, his small voice carrying across the quiet cabin where frustrated travelers began to realize they were witnessing something remarkable. "Arbare Kamsa Siddha." His participation in the activity demonstrated how professional childcare techniques could succeed where wealth and privilege had failed to provide comfort or relief. "Excellent job, Omar," Sarah praised in Arabic before translating for the listening passengers. "He's very smart and knows his numbers perfectly, which shows how well his parents have been teaching him." Her compliments served multiple purposes by boosting Omar's confidence while validating Khalid's parenting in front of critics who had blamed him for his son's behavior. "Now can you teach me how to count in English?" Sarah asked, reversing their roles in a way that gave Omar a sense of control and expertise that helped restore his emotional equilibrium. 1, 2, 3, Omar replied with growing confidence, his tears stopping completely as he focused on the educational game that provided structure and purpose to replace his anxious crying. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. He continued with obvious pride in his bilingual abilities that impressed passengers who had only seen him as a source of noise and disruption. "Omar, you're teaching me so well," Sarah responded with genuine enthusiasm. "I think you're going to be a wonderful teacher when you grow up, just like your mama is wonderful at taking care of you." Her reference to his mother maintained connection to his primary attachment while providing positive vision for his future that helped counteract his current anxiety and fear. "Mama is doctor," Omar announced with pride that reflected his understanding of his mother's profession despite his young age. She helps sick people feel better. The revelation that Layla was a physician added ironic dimension to the situation, as a doctor's son was being comforted by a nurse while his mother underwent surgery that would determine her own health outcomes. "That's right," Sarah confirmed. "And right now, other doctors are helping your mama feel better, just like I'm helping you feel better on this airplane." Her parallel explanation helped Omar understand the medical situation in terms that his 3-year-old mind could process without becoming overwhelmed by adult concerns about surgical risks and complications. The transformation in cabin atmosphere became palpable as Omar's calm behavior allowed exhausted passengers to finally relax after hours of tension and irritation that had made the luxury flight feel like an endurance test. "I can't believe the difference," whispered Margaret Sterling to her husband Robert, her previous complaints about the crying child replaced by amazement at Sarah's professional skills. "That woman is a miracle worker. She did what no one else could accomplish." Her change in attitude reflected how witnessing effective problem-solving could shift perspective from criticism to appreciation for both the helper and the helped. "She must be incredibly skilled," observed Victoria Hamilton, "to speak Arabic fluently and understand child psychology well enough to calm a distressed toddler in a matter of minutes." Her recognition of Sarah's professional competence contrasted sharply with earlier assumptions that the crying child simply reflected poor parenting or inadequate discipline. "I feel terrible about complaining earlier," admitted Jonathan Mitchell. "That little boy was genuinely scared about his mother, not just being spoiled or bratty like I assumed." His acknowledgement of misjudgment reflected how crisis situations could reveal both the worst and best aspects of human nature when people were forced to confront their assumptions about others. "The father looks like he's about to cry with relief," noted Patricia Chen, observing Khalid's emotional response to his son's improved condition. "You can see how much he loves that child and how helpless he felt when nothing he tried worked." Her empathetic observation demonstrated how witnessing parental vulnerability could generate compassion even from previously unsympathetic observers. "I wonder what would have happened if that nurse hadn't been on this flight," pondered James Thompson, because the situation was escalating beyond what airline staff could handle effectively. His speculation highlighted how chance encounters with skilled professionals could transform crisis situations that seemed impossible to resolve through conventional means. "That woman deserves recognition for what she just accomplished," declared businessman Charles Wright. "She didn't just help one family. She saved this entire flight from a situation that was becoming unbearable for everyone involved." His assessment reflected growing passenger appreciation for Sarah's intervention that had benefited the entire first-class cabin rather than just the immediate participants in the crisis. The conversation that developed between Prince Khalid and Sarah as Omar dozed peacefully in his father's arms revealed the depth of family crisis that had prompted their emergency travel and the medical expertise that Sarah brought to understanding their situation. "My wife Layla had complications from emergency surgery," Khalid explained quietly to avoid waking his son. "And the doctor said we needed to come immediately because her condition was unstable and unpredictable." His disclosure of family medical crisis provided context for Omar's extreme distress while revealing vulnerability that transcended his royal status and enormous wealth. "I understand," Sarah replied with professional empathy. "Emergency surgeries are terrifying for families, especially when they involve complications that require immediate travel and difficult decisions about treatment options." Her medical background allowed her to appreciate the clinical realities that Khalid was facing while maintaining appropriate boundaries about specific medical details. "Omar has never been separated from his mother for more than a few hours," Khalid continued. "And he could sense our panic about her condition even though we tried to hide our fear from him." His insight into his son's emotional intelligence demonstrated understanding that children often absorbed adult anxiety even when parents attempted to protect them from frightening information. "Children are incredibly perceptive about emotional atmosphere," Sarah confirmed. "And Omar's crying was probably his way of expressing the fear and uncertainty that everyone in your family is feeling about your wife's medical situation." Her explanation helped Khalid understand that his son's behavior reflected normal psychological response rather than behavioral problem that indicated poor parenting or inadequate discipline. "What you did for him was remarkable," Khalid said with genuine gratitude. "Not just the Arabic, but understanding what he needed when I was too emotionally involved to think clearly about his specific needs." His appreciation reflected recognition that professional expertise combined with cultural sensitivity had provided solutions that love alone couldn't achieve in crisis situations. "Sometimes parents are too close to the situation," Sarah replied. "And an outside perspective can identify interventions that work when family members are overwhelmed by their own emotional investment in the outcome." Her professional wisdom about family dynamics provided framework for understanding why her techniques had succeeded where previous attempts had failed to calm Omar's distress. The medical discussion that ensued between Sarah and Dr. Hassan revealed additional layers of professional competence that impressed both the royal family and listening passengers who began to understand they were witnessing interaction between highly qualified healthcare professionals. "Your technique with the child was masterful," Dr. Hassan commented to Sarah. "I'm a family physician, but my pediatric training never included the cultural sensitivity and language skills you demonstrated." His professional recognition validated Sarah's approach while acknowledging limitations in his own expertise when dealing with psychologically distressed children in cross-cultural contexts. "Working with refugee families taught me that medical intervention isn't always about medication or procedures," Sarah replied. "Sometimes it's about communication, understanding, and providing emotional support that addresses underlying causes rather than just symptoms." Her philosophy about holistic healthcare resonated with both doctors while providing insight into her international experience that had developed skills beyond traditional nursing training. "The refugee camps must have been incredibly challenging," Khalid observed. "Both medically and emotionally, dealing with families who had experienced trauma and displacement." His recognition of the difficulties inherent in humanitarian healthcare work demonstrated respect for Sarah's career choices that prioritized service above financial gain. "It was difficult but rewarding," Sarah confirmed, "because you learn that healing involves much more than medical treatment. It requires understanding cultural background, family dynamics, and psychological factors that influence how people respond to crisis situations." Her comprehensive approach to patient care reflected training and experience that exceeded what most wealthy families encountered in private medical practice focused primarily on clinical rather than emotional interventions. "Omar's response to you proves that point perfectly," Dr. Hassan noted. "Because his crying wasn't really a medical problem. It was an emotional and cultural communication issue that required your specific combination of skills and experience." His analysis highlighted how Sarah's intervention had succeeded by addressing root causes rather than just treating surface symptoms of Omar's distress. "I'm curious about your background," Khalid said respectfully, "because your skills suggest extensive training and experience that goes far beyond what most people would expect from someone traveling in coach class." His question reflected growing understanding that Sarah's professional qualifications might be more impressive than her humble appearance and economy seating had initially suggested to observers who equated expertise with visible wealth and luxury travel accommodations. The revelation of Sarah's extensive medical credentials and international humanitarian experience created new appreciation among first-class passengers who began to understand they were in the presence of someone whose professional accomplishments exceeded many of their own achievements despite her modest circumstances. "I have a master's degree in pediatric nursing from Johns Hopkins," Sarah explained in response to Prince Khalid's question. "And I've spent the last 8 years working with Doctors Without Borders in refugee camps throughout the Middle East and Africa." Her educational and professional background impressed passengers who had initially dismissed her as just another economy traveler without significant qualifications or expertise. "Doctors Without Borders," repeated Dr. Hassan with obvious respect. "That's incredibly prestigious medical humanitarian work that requires exceptional skills and dedication to help the world's most vulnerable populations." His professional recognition of her organization provided context for passengers who might not have understood the significance of her international medical service. Why are you traveling in economy if you have those qualifications? Asked businessman Robert Sterling with curiosity that reflected his assumption that professional expertise should correlate with financial success and luxury lifestyle choices. Because I choose to spend my money on medical supplies for refugee camps rather than expensive airline seats, Sarah replied without defensiveness. And I've learned that comfort doesn't come from luxury accommodations. It comes from knowing you're using your skills to help people who need them most. Her explanation of personal values challenged assumptions about success and priority that characterized most first-class passengers who equated achievement with material accumulation and conspicuous consumption. That's incredibly admirable, admitted Victoria Hamilton. I spend more on a single shopping trip than most people earn in a year, but you're using your resources to save lives in places most people would never consider visiting. Her acknowledgement of the contrast between her lifestyle and Sarah's choices reflected growing recognition that true accomplishment might involve service rather than accumulation. Omar is lucky you were on this flight, Khalid observed. Because your specific combination of medical training, cultural understanding, and humanitarian experience was exactly what he needed during his crisis. His gratitude reflected understanding that chance encounters with exceptional people could provide solutions that money and privilege couldn't purchase or arrange through conventional means. The discussion about humanitarian medical work continued as passengers became increasingly interested in Sarah's experiences, and the contrast between her service-oriented career and their wealth-focused lifestyles that suddenly seemed less meaningful when confronted with genuine dedication to helping others. What's it like working in refugee camps? Asked Patricia Chen. I can't imagine the conditions and challenges you must face every day while providing medical care to displaced families. Her question reflected curiosity about experiences that lay completely outside the protected world of wealth and privilege that characterized her normal social interactions. It's challenging but incredibly rewarding, Sarah replied. Because you see the resilience of human beings who have lost everything but still maintain hope and dignity while rebuilding their lives. Her description of refugee experiences provided perspective that challenged passengers' complaints about minor inconveniences like flight delays or inadequate service that seemed trivial compared to genuine hardship and displacement. The children are especially resilient, Sarah continued. They adapt to difficult circumstances and find joy in simple things that wealthy children might take for granted or dismiss as inadequate entertainment. Her observation about childhood adaptability across economic circumstances resonated with parents like Khalid, who recognized universal aspects of child psychology that transcended cultural and economic boundaries. Working with refugee families taught me that happiness doesn't depend on material possessions, Sarah added, but on family connection, community support, and hope for the future, regardless of current circumstances or financial resources. Her philosophy about human fulfillment contrasted sharply with the materialistic worldview that characterized most first-class passengers who had assumed that wealth provided the foundation for meaningful life experiences. That's a profound perspective, admitted Charles Wright. I've spent my entire career accumulating wealth and luxury, but listening to you makes me wonder if I've been focusing on the wrong measures of success and accomplishment. His reflection demonstrated how exposure to different value systems could prompt wealthy individuals to examine their own assumptions about what constituted meaningful achievement and personal fulfillment. Your work sounds more meaningful than anything I've accomplished, observed Margaret Sterling. Despite all the money my husband and I have earned through our business ventures and investment strategies. Her admission that financial success might be less significant than humanitarian service reflected the impact that Sarah's example was having on passengers who had previously measured worth primarily through material accumulation and social status. The deeper conversation that developed between Prince Khalid and Sarah during Omar's peaceful sleep revealed family circumstances that transformed passenger understanding of the royal family's crisis from mere inconvenience to genuine human tragedy deserving compassion and support. Layla isn't just my wife, Khalid explained quietly. She's one of the leading pediatric surgeons in the Middle East, and she was operating on a child when she collapsed from complications that the doctors are still trying to understand. His disclosure of his wife's medical expertise and the circumstances of her emergency added gravity to their situation while explaining Omar's particular attachment to a mother whose profession involved healing children like himself. "She sounds remarkable," Sarah replied with professional respect. "Pediatric surgery requires incredible skill and dedication, especially in regions where medical resources might be limited compared to Western facilities." Her understanding of the challenges inherent in Middle Eastern medical practice demonstrated knowledge that transcended cultural stereotypes and reflected genuine appreciation for international healthcare complexities. "Omar adores her," Khalid continued, "and he often accompanies her to the hospital where he sees her helping sick children, so he understands that Mama is a healer who makes people feel better." The revelation that Omar had direct experience with his mother's medical work provided additional context for his distress at being unable to understand why the healers couldn't immediately fix his mama's own medical problems. "That explains his emotional intensity," Sarah observed. "Because children who understand that their parents help others often feel confused and frightened when those same parents become patients who need help themselves." Her insight into child psychology helped Khalid understand that Omar's crying represented complex emotions about role reversal and powerlessness rather than simple separation anxiety or behavioral problems. "The doctors in New York said her condition was too complex for treatment in Dubai," Khalid explained, "and they needed her to travel immediately for specialized surgery that wasn't available in our region." His description of the medical urgency that had prompted their emergency travel provided context for the family's emotional state and Omar's resulting distress at the sudden disruption of his normal routine and separation from his mother. "International medical travel is incredibly stressful," Sarah confirmed, "especially when it involves emergency conditions that require immediate decisions about treatment options in unfamiliar healthcare systems." Her professional understanding of medical tourism challenges validated Khalid's anxiety while providing framework for understanding the multiple stressors affecting their entire family situation. The personal revelation that Prince Khalid shared about his own background and values challenged passenger assumptions about royal families and demonstrated that wealth and title didn't automatically provide protection from life's fundamental challenges and tragedies. "People assume that being a prince means having easy life without real problems," Khalid said with vulnerability that surprised listening passengers. "But money can't prevent illness, and royal status doesn't protect families from medical emergencies that threaten people we love." His acknowledgement of wealth's limitations in addressing health crises resonated with passengers who had their own experiences with family medical problems that had tested their resources and emotional resilience. "I was educated in London and Boston," Khalid continued. "But all that education feels useless when I can't help my son understand why his mother is sick and why we had to leave home so suddenly for treatment in a foreign country." His admission of helplessness despite educational privilege demonstrated that parental challenges transcended economic and social boundaries when families faced genuine crisis situations. "My father wants me to focus on business and politics," Khalid added. "But watching Layla save children's lives made me understand that real leadership means service to others rather than just accumulating power and wealth." His philosophical reflection about meaningful accomplishment echoed themes that Sarah had introduced about using skills and resources to help people rather than simply advancing personal interests. "That's exactly the kind of leadership the world needs," Sarah replied with respect. "People who understand that privilege creates responsibility to help others rather than just opportunity to accumulate more advantages for themselves." Her validation of his service-oriented values provided encouragement for worldview that differed significantly from typical royal family priorities focused on maintaining power and increasing wealth. "Layla and I have been discussing establishing medical clinics for refugee families," Khalid revealed, "because her work with children made us realize that healthcare should be available to everyone regardless of their ability to pay or their legal status in different countries." His description of humanitarian plans demonstrated that the royal couple shared values that transcended their privileged circumstances while addressing genuine human needs that their resources could meaningfully impact. "That would be incredible," Sarah responded with enthusiasm. Because refugee families often lack access to specialized pediatric care that could make enormous difference in children's health outcomes and long-term development. Her professional appreciation for the proposed clinics reflected understanding of healthcare gaps that wealthy families might not normally encounter or consider addressing through philanthropic activities. The conversation about humanitarian healthcare projects created a bridge between Sarah's experience and Prince Khalid's resources that suggested potential for collaboration that could significantly impact refugee family medical needs in ways that neither could achieve independently. Would you consider consulting on such a project? Khalid asked hopefully. Because your experience with refugee medical needs combined with our financial resources could create something truly effective rather than just well-intentioned charity that doesn't address real problems. His proposal reflected recognition that successful humanitarian work required expertise and cultural understanding rather than just money and good intentions. I would be honored to help, Sarah replied with genuine enthusiasm. Because combining field experience with adequate funding could create medical programs that actually meet refugee family needs rather than just providing symbolic assistance. Her willingness to collaborate demonstrated commitment to humanitarian service that transcended economic and social boundaries while potentially creating lasting impact for vulnerable populations. We could establish pediatric clinics near refugee camps, Khalid suggested, building on their shared vision. With specialized programs for children who have experienced trauma and displacement that affects their physical and emotional development. His specific ideas about trauma-informed care reflected understanding that refugee medical needs extended beyond routine healthcare to address psychological impacts of displacement and violence. That's exactly right, Sarah confirmed. Because refugee children often need integrated medical and psychological support that addresses both their physical health problems and their emotional recovery from traumatic experiences. Her professional validation of the comprehensive approach provided foundation for planning realistic interventions that could meaningfully improve refugee family outcomes. This flight has become something I never expected, Khalid observed. What started as a family emergency has led to meeting someone whose expertise could help us create something meaningful for families who don't have our advantages. His recognition that crisis had created opportunity for service reflected philosophical maturity about finding purpose in difficulty while using privilege to address other people's needs rather than just personal problems. Sometimes the most meaningful connections happen during difficult circumstances, Sarah replied. Because crisis situations reveal what people really value and whether they're willing to help others despite their own challenges. Her insight about human character under pressure provided framework for understanding how their meeting during family emergency had created foundation for potential humanitarian collaboration that neither had anticipated when boarding the aircraft. The practical discussion about establishing refugee medical clinics revealed both the scope of need that Sarah had witnessed and the resources that Prince Khalid could potentially mobilize to address healthcare gaps that affected thousands of displaced families throughout the Middle East and Africa. In Jordan alone, there are over 600,000 registered refugees, Sarah explained, providing statistical context for the humanitarian need. And most camps have basic medical facilities but lack specialized pediatric care that could prevent minor problems from becoming serious health crises. Her detailed knowledge of refugee demographics demonstrated professional familiarity with population health challenges that required systematic rather than individual interventions to achieve meaningful impact. Our family foundation could fund comprehensive medical facilities, Khalid replied. But we need guidance about program design that addresses actual needs rather than what wealthy donors think refugees should want or need. His acknowledgement of the gap between donor assumptions and recipient needs reflected unusual awareness among wealthy philanthropists about the importance of community-informed programming rather than externally imposed solutions. The most important aspect is cultural competency, Sarah emphasized. Because refugee families often have specific beliefs about healthcare that need to be respected and incorporated into treatment approaches rather than dismissed or overridden by Western medical practices. Her insight about the importance of culturally appropriate healthcare resonated with Khalid's own experience as someone from Middle Eastern background who understood how cultural sensitivity affected medical compliance and treatment outcomes. We could recruit medical professionals from refugee communities, Khalid suggested, so that patients receive care from people who share their language, culture, and understanding of their specific experiences with displacement and trauma. His idea about community-based staffing reflected sophisticated understanding of healthcare delivery that went beyond simple provision of services to address cultural barriers that often prevented effective treatment. That's exactly the approach that works, Sarah confirmed, because refugee families are more likely to trust medical providers who understand their background and can communicate in their native language about sensitive health issues. Her validation of community-based healthcare models provided foundation for planning clinics that could achieve genuine impact rather than just symbolic assistance. This project could transform lives, Khalid realized, not just through medical treatment but by providing employment opportunities for refugee medical professionals who currently can't practice their professions due to certification barriers. His recognition of economic development potential reflected comprehensive thinking about humanitarian intervention that addressed multiple community needs simultaneously rather than focusing narrowly on single issues. The emotional impact of their conversation became evident as other passengers began to understand they were witnessing the development of a humanitarian partnership that could significantly impact refugee healthcare while demonstrating how crisis situations could catalyze meaningful social contribution rather than just personal recovery. "This is remarkable," whispered Dr. Hassan to nearby passengers. Watching a family emergency transform into plans for helping thousands of refugee families access medical care that could save children's lives. His professional appreciation for the scope of their proposed collaboration highlighted how chance encounters could create opportunities for service that exceeded individual capabilities or resources. "I feel ashamed of my earlier complaints," admitted Robert Sterling. "Here's a royal family dealing with serious medical crisis, and they're discussing how to help other families rather than just focusing on their own problems." His acknowledgement of perspective shift reflected how witnessing genuine service orientation could challenge materialistic worldviews and prompt reconsideration of personal priorities and values. "That woman is extraordinary," observed Victoria Hamilton. "She's not trying to network with wealthy passengers or advance her career. She's genuinely focused on helping refugee families and now potentially creating systematic change through collaboration." Her recognition of Sarah's authentic service motivation contrasted with typical first-class networking that focused on personal advancement rather than humanitarian impact. "I want to contribute to their project," announced Charles Wright, "because listening to their conversation makes me realize that my business success should be used to support meaningful causes rather than just accumulating more wealth." His spontaneous offer to support the refugee clinic project demonstrated how witnessing service-oriented collaboration could inspire others to redirect resources toward humanitarian purposes. "We could all contribute," suggested Patricia Chen, "and turn this flight experience into something that creates lasting benefit for families who desperately need medical care that we take for granted." Her proposal for group participation reflected how collective humanitarian action could emerge from shared witness to genuine need and effective solutions. "This started with a crying child," reflected Margaret Sterling, "and now it's becoming a movement to help thousands of refugee families access life-saving medical care for their own children." Her observation about the transformation of crisis into opportunity demonstrated how individual difficulties could catalyze broader social impact when people responded with service rather than just seeking personal relief. The final hours of the flight were transformed from endurance test to inspiring collaboration as passengers contributed ideas, contacts, and financial commitments to support the refugee medical clinic project that had emerged from Prince Khalid's family emergency and Sarah's professional expertise. "I have medical supply company connections," offered Jonathan Mitchell, "and I can arrange wholesale pricing for equipment and medications that could significantly reduce operational costs for the clinics." His business contacts represented practical contribution that could enhance project effectiveness while demonstrating how professional networks could be redirected toward humanitarian purposes rather than just profit maximization. My law firm handles international non-profit registration, added James Thompson. And we could provide legal services pro bono to establish the foundation structure needed for legitimate charitable operations in multiple countries. His offer of professional services reflected how expertise could be contributed alongside financial resources to create comprehensive support for humanitarian projects that required sophisticated operational infrastructure. I know medical professionals who would volunteer time, contributed Patricia Chen. Because many doctors and nurses want to do humanitarian work but lack connections to established programs that provide meaningful service opportunities. Her network of potential volunteers demonstrated how chance encounters could mobilize human resources that existed but required coordination to achieve effective humanitarian impact. This is unprecedented, marveled flight attendant Jennifer Walsh. I've never seen first-class passengers collaborate on humanitarian project during a flight, especially one that started with complaints about a crying child. Her amazement at the transformation reflected how crisis situations could reveal positive human potential that remained hidden during normal comfortable circumstances that didn't require mutual support or service to others. Omar's crying brought us all together, Prince Khalid observed with wonder. And Sarah's kindness has created opportunity to help thousands of children whose families need medical care that we can provide through collaboration. His recognition that his son's distress had catalyzed meaningful humanitarian partnership demonstrated how individual suffering could generate collective response that created benefits far beyond immediate relief. Sometimes the most difficult experiences lead to the most meaningful outcomes, Sarah replied, because they force us to look beyond our own circumstances and recognize opportunities to serve others who face even greater challenges. Her philosophical insight about finding purpose in difficulty provided framework for understanding how the flight's crisis had created foundation for lasting humanitarian impact that none of the participants had anticipated when boarding the aircraft.